All right. Now we are in Chapter 4, Desert Ways and Places. So last time we had learned that the only place that they could have made a bow is in a very specific spot on the Arabian Peninsula, because normally they didn't have a really good wood anywhere, which is pretty common for being in a desert. And so if you follow their travels, it happens just exactly where it needed to happen for it to work out. All right, now, desert ways and desert places. Lehi's altar. As his first act, once his tent had been pitched for his first important camp, which was 3 days' journey outside of Jerusalem for a very important reason, but anyways, Lehi built an altar of stones and made an offering unto the Lord and gave thanks to the Lord. That's 1 Nephi 2:7. It is for all the world as if they had been reading Robert Smith. The ordinary mark of a Semitic sanctuary, Hebrew as well as Arabic, that is the sacrificial pillar, keren. Keren. The keren. It's the pile of stones to make basically the altar or offering, or rude altar, upon which sacrifices are presented to the god. In Arabia, we find no proper altar, but in its place a rude pillar or heap of stones, besides which the victim is slain. It was at this same altar of stones that Lehi and his family did offer sacrifice and burnt offerings, and they gave thanks unto the God of Israel. Upon the safe return of his sons from their dangerous expedition to Jerusalem, when Raswan reports a baby camel, so as you can see, he takes the scriptures and then he starts quoting other people's references in books. That way he can kind of seamlessly try and make his point. When Raswan reports a baby camel was brought up to Mishael's tent as a sacrificial offering in honor of the safe return of Fuaz, we cannot help thinking of some such scene before the tent of Lehi on the safe return of his sons. This is what the Arabs called a Dhabiya al-Qasb, Dhabiyyeh -L-KASB. Let's see what I'm... Shoving some consonants together in weird ways results in Dhabiya al-Qasb. Or if the D and the B are silent at the beginning and the end, then it would be Dhabiya al-Qasb. Dhabiya al-Qasb. I keep wanting to put the B in there for some reason, but there you go. A sacrifice to celebrate the successful return of warriors, hunters, and raiders to the camp. This sacrifice, writes Jason, is always in honor of an ancestor. And Nephi twice mentions the tribal ancestor in Israel in his brief account. In the best desert manner, Lehi, immediately after Thanksgiving rites, fell to examining the spoils. To this day, the Bedouin makes sacrifice on every important occasion, not for magical and superstitious reasons, but because he lives under the constant impression of a higher force that surrounds him. St. Nilius, in the oldest known eyewitness account of life among the Arabs of Tih, says, that's T-I-H, they sacrifice on altars of crude stones piled together. That Lehi's was such an altar would follow not only from the ancient law demanding uncut stones, but also from the Book of Mormon expression, an altar of stones, which is not the same thing as a stone altar. Such little heaps of stones surviving from all ages are still to be seen throughout the South Desert. Contacts in the desert. So, again, what's the point of this? This is proving that the actions that Lehi and his family took all point to the realism of the Book of Mormon. Contacts in the desert. The Book of Mormon makes no mention of Lehi's people meeting any other party in their 8 years of wandering. Casual meetings with stray families of Bedouins then, as now, would merit no special attention. But how are they able to avoid any important contacts for 8 years and some 2,500 miles of wandering. One illuminating aside by Nephi explains everything. It was only after they had reached the seashore, he says, that his people were able to make fires without danger, for the Lord had not hitherto suffered that they should make much fire. As we journeyed in the wilderness, for, he said, I will make thy food become sweet, that ye cook it not, and I will also be your light in the wilderness. That's 1 Nephi 17 and 12. That tells all. I well remember, writes Bertram Thomas, taking part in a discussion upon the unhealthfulness of campfires by night. We discontinued them forthwith in spite of the bitter cold. Major Chessman's guide would not even let him light a tiny lamp in order to jot down star readings, and they never dared build a fire on the open plain where it would attract the attention of a prowling raiding party over long distances and invite a night attack. Once in a while, in favorably sheltered depression, we dared not build a fire that could not be seen from a high spot, writes Roswin. That is, fires are not absolutely out of the question, but are rare and risky. Not much fire, was Lehi's rule, and fires in the daytime are almost as risky as night. Palgrave tells how his party were forced, lest the smoke of our fire should give notice to some distant rover, to content ourselves with dry dates instead of cooked foods. So of course no fire means raw food, and what is one to do if one's diet is meat? Throughout the desert, writes Burkhardt, when a sheep or goat is killed, the persons present often eat the liver and kidney raw, adding to it a little salt. Some Arabs of Yemen are said to eat raw not only those parts, but likewise whole slices of flesh, thus resembling the Abyssinians and the Druses of Lebanon, who frequently indulge in raw meat, the latter to my own certain knowledge. Nilius, writing 14 centuries earlier, tells us how the Bedouin of the Tih live on the flesh of wild animals, failing which they slaughter a camel, one of their beasts of burden, and nourish themselves like animals from the raw meat, or else scorch the flesh quickly in a small fire to soften it sufficiently not to have to gnaw it like dogs. Only too well does this state of things match the grim economy of Lehi. They did suffer much for want of food, and we did live upon raw meat in the wilderness. All this bears out the conviction, supported both by modern experience and the evidence of archaeology, that Lehi was moving through a dangerous world. In ancient times, Jewish merchants traveling through the desert fell so often into the hands of Bedouin raiders that by the beginning of the Christian era, their word for captor normally meant simply Arab. Oof. That's rough. When literally one word is basically the same as the other. That's a little stronger than just a stereotype. That's almost a certainty in their world at that time. Ouch. Arab inscriptions from Lehi's time show that in the peninsula there was constant unrest, even as in modern times. Ordinary times in the desert are bad times when, in the words of one of the oldest Arab poets, Mu'alaquat, the 7th, page 38, the honored man did not dare stay in the open country, and flight did not save the coward. A lonely life it is, writes Philby, a life of constant fear. Hunger is the rule of the desert. Hunger, danger, loneliness, fear. Lehi's people knew them all. Just what was the danger? The Arab tribes are in a state of almost perpetual war against each other. To surprise the enemy by a sudden attack and to plunder a camp are chief objectives of both parties. Raiding to them is the spice of life. Might is right, and man ever walks in fear for his life and possessions. Lehi could ill afford to get embroiled in these perennial desert feuds, and yet he was everywhere a trespasser. The only way for him to stay out of trouble was to observe a rule which Thomas lays down for all travelers in the desert, even today. As an approaching party may be friend, but is always assumed to be foe. In the words of the ancient poet Zuhair, he who travels should consider his friend to be his enemy. Oof. St. Nilius describes Bedouins on the same jittery, nervous, and unbearable tension that make the accounts of Chessman, Philby, Thomas, and Palgrave, Buckhart, and others such exciting reading. At the merest sign of an armed man, he says, his Bedou fled in alarm, as if seized by panic and fear. He kept on fleeing, for fear makes them exaggerate danger and causes them to imagine things far beyond reality, magnifying their dread in every instance. Just so their modern descendants live always under the impression that an invasion is on the way, and every suspicious shadow or movement on the horizon calls for attention. According to the astute Baldenspierger, this almost hysterical state of apprehension is actually a prime condition of survival in the desert. A Bedouin never tells his name, says the writer just quoted, nor his tribe, nor his business, nor the whereabouts of his people, even if he is in a friendly district. They are, and must be, very cautious. A word out of season may bring death and destruction. When the Beni Hillel migrate, it is under the darkness of night, under the obscuring veil of the rain. By passing settled places in darkness and in silence, what can better describe such a state of the things than the Book of Mormon expression, a lonesome and a solemn people? Dougherty said he had never met a merry man among the Arabs, and there is no humor in the Book of Mormon. This mood is hardly accidental. If the Hebrew gets his brooding qualities from the desert ancestors, why not the Lamanite? Sir Richard Burton, yeah, that's a good point. Sir Richard Burton, one of the few individuals who has ever known both the American Indian and Bedouin Arab at first hand, was greatly impressed by their exact resemblance to each other, a resemblance so striking that he must warn his reader against attributing it to a common origin, explaining that the perfect paralleling of temperament and behavior as due to the almost absolute independence of their way of life. Yet many equally independent tribesmen in other parts of the world in no way resemble these two. One of the writer's best friends is a venerable but enterprising Lebanese who has spent many years both among the Bedouins of the desert and the Indians of New Mexico as a peddler and trader. He avers, A-V-E-R-S, that swears, basically. He avers that there is absolutely no difference between the two races so far as manners and customs are concerned. Arabs now living in Utah who have had some contacts with Indians in the West affirm the same thing with considerable emphasis. It is a nice problem for the sociologist, and the writer only mentions it because it has been brought to his attention innumerable times. There may be something to it. Lehi's party, as we have noted, were like the Beni Hillel trespassers wherever they walked. Every inch of the desert is claimed by some tribe or other that will demand the life of a trespasser. Marked boundaries do not exist, and it is natural that questions of ownership should be settled by fighting, which becomes an annual affair, while looting of camels grows into a habit, according to Chessman. Hence the need for extreme caution and strict avoidance on Lehi's part. In most cases, says Jennings Bramley, Arabs do not think it prudent to allow the raiders near enough to decide whether they are friendly or not, and he describes a typical meeting in the desert. Both we and they are doing our best not to be seen. Of course, this sort of thing leads to comic situations, ignoble panic, and ridiculous anticlimaxes. But in a game of life and death, one simply can't take chances. And Lehi was playing for the highest stakes. And so we are left with the picture of a wandering band sticking glumly to themselves for years on end, which, impossible as it seems to us, is a normal thing in the desert wastes, where the touchy, dangerous, unsocial Bedouin takes his stand as one of the most difficult, challenging, and fascinating creatures on earth. Ooh, I don't know, that is really rough. I never ever considered how lonely it is to live in such a world of worry and pain. The reason why, I think, is pretty obvious. I mean, I'm lucky enough to live in a very blessed world where, for example, I really appreciate, it's one of my little favorite places is in nerddom is the Fallout universe. I like those games, and they made the TV show recently, which I watched with caution. And one of the first things, one of the original, the character you are following is a girl named Lucy. She comes from a vault, which was just the underground fallout shelter. During when the bombs dropped, they were kept safe. She grew up there, she lived there, and when she was finally sent to the surface because she's searching after her dad after a raider party destroys a bunch of their vault, so she's going looking for her dad. But on her first night up there, really crazy, strange thing happens. She makes a fire. She falls asleep next to the fire. And when she wakes up, there's a mysterious science guy there. And thankfully, he wasn't a raider. And he basically tells her as such. He's like, look, you are just fresh out of a vault, and I can tell because you basically made a fire. Fires are a bad thing out here in the wastelands because it attracts not only raiders, but also bugs. And then his dog goes and finds a big, giant radioactive bug and kills it. But anyways, I thought that was funny, and I thought that was actually, that's a good point. I did not realize how serious that stuff is until we read this chapter, because, I mean, he's right, if you think about it. If you live in a world where there is no borders, no rules, no third party with the monopoly on violence, such as a police force or a government, to help step in and arbitrate right from wrong, as long as that third party arbitration is actually upheld equally and consistently. At least a little is better than none. But because if you have none, things fall apart real quick, obviously, as we can see right here. This is what it's like. If you want utter and actual anarchy, like literally the political group, not just the concept of anarchy, but the literal governmental idea of anarchy, this is it. Everything is done on vigilante justice, which is no justice at all, because the idea is that you take what you can to survive at the expense of others. That's all there is to it. I think if you want to know, here it is. Here's a perfect example. So for your sociologists or for trying to understand what it's like, geez, it's just, wow, that is really rough. And so if they grew up with that, if they grew to be, so Lehi was already old enough to have 4 sons. He had 2 more in the wilderness. You have Nephi and his family, probably Nephi starting out as older teenagers, maybe middle to older teenagers. Started out, they would have grown up and had their own families, all while being desert Bedouin, running, on the run people. Although I think Nephi was a lot more optimistic. And I think that makes sense too, because when you have the gospel with you, yes, there's a lot of trials, but it brings you hope and comfort. On the other hand, who was theirs? After Nephi, there was Jacob. Maybe it was Jerem. First and second books of Nephi, Jacob, Enos, Jeremiah. Yeah, I think it was Jerem. But one of them talked about growing up kind of in sadness all his days, basically just suffering through life. And I'm like, ouch, dude, I'm sorry. That's rough. I suspect it's Jerem. And I think he got it from, growing up like that. I mean, imagine so they are compelled to work together to build a ship. They make it to the Americas. They then try and establish a kingdom, basically just an area where they can have their families grow. And then as soon as Lehi dies, Nephi and the people who want to follow Nephi are like, yeah, if we stick around, this is not going to be good for us. So they run away and establish their own kingdom of Nephi, while the Lamanites establish their own area. That's, interesting. It's, I think, the first time in a very long time they could settle down. Family affairs. But how do the members of such closed corporations hit it off among themselves? So in this respect, when he says corporation, our modern word for corporation that we have as businesses comes from the original idea of a company of people, and not meaning that, it's like an LLC or a whatever else, like meaning that you have a group of people come together, sign a contract of what the rules are going to be of how they're going to conduct themselves. And so when he's using a closed corporation or a closed company, he's talking about the original meaning of the group of people journeying or working together according to a certain set of rules. But how do members of such closed corporations hit it off among themselves? It is the domestic history that presents the real challenge to whoever would write a history of the Bedouin life. To handle it convincingly would tax the knowledge of the best psychologist, and woe to him if he does not know the peculiar ways of the Eastern Desert, which surprise and trap the unwary Westerner at every turn. The ancient Hebrew family, the absolute blessings of having the ignorance that we do is staggering. Again, you can see tropes of that on TV with Fallout, like the vault dwellers wandering out in the wilderness and having the harsh realities of life slap them upside the head. At the same time, I'm like, yeah, and we think we know better. When you finally come up against this and you're like, yeah, that you genuinely accidentally see someone across over on the horizon and you both panic and try and run away from each other in very weird and hilarious ways. Yeah. We don't live with that. We don't live with the constant fear that someone will come and steal everything that we need to survive and live, to have a slow, agonizing death in the desert, or worse. We don't live with that. There are very few people, thankfully, that actually live in a life where they have been so henpecked or been so dejected that they live at the bottom of whatever hierarchy that they are, and they feel it. Most of the time, if you're at the bottom of a hierarchy, you don't care, only because you're not competing in that. Like, I am not going for soccer star of the year of the world. That's not my hierarchy I climb. Knowledge and nerdiness, sure. Those I will take slightly more pride in, or being able to have a family and provide for my family. Those are all things that in some way I am, whether I like it or not, I'm on some sort of hierarchy. But I'm not on the bottom rung. I'm not legitimately homeless. I'm not legitimately without resources. And I'm not in fear of everything being taken from me at every moment. When you live at the bottom in a very basic survival mode, it psychologically really does a number on you. It makes you wary of everything. It makes you hypersensitive in a lot of ways. And so, yeah, when I sit here and say I am gratefully ignorant of a lot of this, I am. I think I think a majority of human beings in the world are gratefully ignorant of this, especially in the Western world. And I hope it can stay that way. We'll see, but I hope we stay that way. And if anything, I hope with the gospel, even if things turn sour in the whole world, that, as was said about the saints going in, about settling St. George, that if all the saints gathered in hell anyway, we'd make it a paradise. And so, if we had to convene ourselves in the worst of circumstances, we will make it a paradise. And I hope that to be true, always, of the saints. All right. The ancient Hebrew family was a peculiar organization, self-sufficient and impatient of any authority beyond its own. These are obviously the very conditions, writes Nowak, which we can still observe today among the Bedouins. Thus, whether we turn to the Hebrew or Arabic sources for our information, the Book of Mormon must conform. Lehi feels no pangs of conscience at deserting Jerusalem, and when his sons think of home, it is specifically of the land of their inheritance, their own family estate for which they yearn. Not even Nephi evinces any loyalty to the Jews at Jerusalem. Split up as they were into squabbling interest groups, indeed, Nephi speaks of his history as an account of my proceedings, and my reign and ministry, as if the wandering family recognized no government but that of its own head. This reminds one of the terms in which one of the earliest Bedouin poets, Ibn Kulthum, speaks of many a sheik whom the tribe had crowned with the crown of authority, and who protects those who seek refuge with him, as if every sheik were truly a king. And in fact, if you read Don Bradley's book of The Lost 116 Pages, which is more like the lost 300 to 400 pages, he takes strong note about how everything that Nephi did as he wrote things down was to showcase the concept that not only was he like leaving Jerusalem. It wasn't just a story of, hey, we left Jerusalem, we made it to the promised land, and God's great. It was also, we are doing our own exodus. We are doing a reverse exodus, like as in scriptural exodus, from Jerusalem to our promised land. We are specifically of the tribe of Joseph, and I am its head, and here are the legitimate claims to leadership in what I am writing. And so when he's talking about Bedouin sheiks being thought of as kings, I think Nephi was extremely aware of that, and I think he was specifically showing it in how he was writing. Again, thank you, Don Bradley. While Lehi lived, he was the sheik, of course, and the relationship between him and his family was described by Nephi as accurate in the smallest detail. With the usual deft sureness and precision, the book shows Lehi leading, not ruling, his people by his own persuasive eloquence and spiritual ascendancy alone, while his murmuring sons followed along exactly in the manner of Philby's Bedouins, and undercurrent of tension in our ranks all day. Frankly, that's true of any parent with children, especially when the children set up their own rivalries. So, I find that common to any family, but I'm grateful for these authors' insights. A great difficulty to appease their evil, envious souls. Anyone with children, just saying. Until they finally grasp what the gospel is truly about and incorporate it in their lives. This is common of every parent. We left Suika, says Burton, all of us in the crossest of humors. So out of temper were my companions, that at sunset, of the whole party, Omar Effendi was the only one who would eat supper, The rest sat upon the ground, pouting and grumbling. Such a game at naughty children I have seldom seen played even by Oriental men. See what I'm saying? The character and behavior of Laman and Lemuel conform to the normal pattern. How true to the Bedouin way are their long, bitter brooding and dangerous outbreaks. How perfectly they resemble the Arab of Lawrence, Dougherty, Burton, and the rest in their sudden and complete changes of heart after their father has lectured them, fiery anger yielding for a moment to a great impulse to humility, and an overwhelming repentance, only to be followed by renewed resentment and more unhappy wrangling. They cannot keep their discontent to themselves, but are everlastingly murmuring. The fact that this all happens in an encampment is known. That all may be said to be related to each other renders intrigue almost impossible. We were all one family, and friendly eyes, Dougherty recollects, then describes the other side of the picture. Arab children are ruled by entreaties. I have known an ill-natured child lay a stick to the back of his good cherishing mother, and the Arabs say, many is the ill-natured lad among us, that he be strong enough will beat his own father. The fact that Laman and Lemuel were grown-up children did not help things. The daily quarrels between parents and children in the desert constitute the worst feature of the Bedouin character, says Buckert, and thus describes the usual source of trouble. The son, arrived at manhood, is too proud to ask his father for any cattle, and the father is hurt at finding that his son behaves with haughtiness towards him, and thus a breach is often made. The son, especially the eldest one, does not feel that he is getting what is coming to him, and behaves like the spoiled child he is. The father's attitude is described by Dougherty, telling how great a sheik dealt with his son. The boy, oftentimes disobedient, upbraided, calling him his life's torment, shaitan. Did you notice that word? I sure did. The boy, oftentimes disobedient, he upbraided, calling him, his father, his life's torment, shaitan. I suspect that's very close to our word, Satan, our tormentor, our accuser. So, when children call you, as the parents, the devil or Satan, you're in good company with the rest of the world. Only never menacing him, for that were far from a Bedouin father's mind. You're such a tyrant, really. This is why section 121, 122 in the Doctrine and Covenants are so pivotal to trying to help get a family understanding. I have good kids. I am so grateful for that. At the same time, I know that we've been through our challenges, and I know that most families have a long period where those don't get resolved. Sometimes that just carries over into adulthood, that the children don't really fully grow up and grasp the idea of truly loving their brothers and sisters, or letting go of resentment and giving forgiveness. It's just, wow. So yeah, add to that huge amounts of stress because of everything that's happening in living in the desert and always wandering, because any contact with others is likely bad contact because they'll either steal or kill. Yeah, no pressure. No wonder they had such a hard time. It is common, says Burckhardt, for mothers and sons to stick together in their frequent squabbles from the old man, in which the son is often expelled from the paternal tent for vindicating his mother's cause. Just so, Sariah takes the part of her sons in chiding her own husband, making the same complaints against him that they did. And she rates him roundly when she thinks he has been the cause of their undoing. Is it any wonder that Laman and Lemuel worked off their pent-up frustration by beating their younger brother with a stick when they were once hiding in a cave? Every free man in the East carries a stick, the immemorial badge of independence and of authority. And every man asserts his authority over his inferiors by his stick, which shows that the holder is a man of position, superior to the workmen or day laborers. The government officials, superior officers, high tax gatherers, and schoolmasters use this short rod to threaten, or if necessary, to beat their inferiors, whoever they may be. The usage is very ancient. A blow for a slave is the ancient maxim in Ahakar, and the proper designation of an underling is abida la asa, stick servant. This is exactly the sense in which Laman and Lemuel intended their little lesson to Nephi, for when the angel turned the tables, he said to them, Why do ye smite your younger brother with a rod? Know ye not that the Lord hath chosen him to be a ruler over you? 1 Nephi 3:29. All that saved Nephi's life on one occasion was the pleading of a daughter of Ishmael and her mother, another authentic touch, since the proud Semite may yield only to the entreaties of a woman without losing face. Burton recalls how even robbers will spare a victim who appeals to them in the name of his wife, the daughter of his uncle. Through it all, Laman, as the eldest son, is the nastiest actor. When only one boy in the family, he is the tyrant, and his will dominates over all. So we see Laman still thinking to dominate over all, and driven mad that a younger brother should show superior talents. The rivalry between the sons of a sheik often leads to bloody tragedies in the sheik's household, and Nephi had some narrow escapes. Yeah. When the chips are hitting the ground and life and death is on your mind constantly, those outbursts. What I find interesting is, would that hold today? I'm sorry. The pleadings of women and children stopping the hand of the men. Would that hold true to today? It used to be a given. It used to be uncontroversial. It used to be something untouchable. That, yeah, of course, you would listen to the pleadings of the women and the children, that you might spare their father, because if you're angry at the other dude, your rage is going. You are likely not going to stop unless you have feminine intervention, because on a basic level, you want to, at some very fundamental level, at least show and find respect for the women, because you're tied together in the dance of life, and on the most basic human level, you want to impress them or show that you have some mercy so that you don't turn away all affections of all women. Would that be true today? I think it depends on the company that you keep. When they talk about the hearts of men going cold, I think I can see why. I think with the derailment of the virtue of women over the past decades, since the 1960s, the slow and then now rapid erosion of the normalcies of relationships between men and women have become such that it has become easier than ever to absolutely disregard what the other has to say, because you just look online and you see the absolute excoriating, venomous, and just absolutely poisonous beliefs that are bandied about with so little regard for the humanity behind them about men. They can turn around and just ignore them and walk away just as much. For example, a student in one of the schools that my family goes to, the person I'm telling the story about is a special needs person. Unfortunately, they must have access to the internet in some way, because in her, and there's different variations of how special needs someone's is, right? You've got those who are really super special needs. They might be in wheelchairs, or they might have, there's just no point in handing them any device because they wouldn't operate it well to any effect. And then you have those people who are not handicapped in that way, but they just mentally or emotionally in some way have been held back, whether that's by family, by trauma, or by genetics, but they still operate and make sense and interact with the world, albeit on an unconventional way because they're held back, right? So this girl, one of my children relates, comes in basically fussing and complaining, and she pulls out all these tropes that she hears from the internet to try and get her way. Because think of it as, how toddlers just run around and do the stupidest things, because not only are they exploring, but they're trying to get their way. They have basic needs, but they don't have the vocabulary yet, so they use all sorts of manipulations and tactics. This is why kids do really funny things, like they'll cry and whine and boob and fuss so that they get mom's loving arms and attentions, and then they go back and press the button that make them cry so that they, once the noise stops and they're done getting the love from their mother, they'll stand up and go and press the button again and start crying and whining and go to their mother, because what do they really want? They want that attention, and so they will leverage whatever they're doing. To us, it's really hilarious. To me, I'm sitting there going, they are getting what they want through doing this stimulus and response. And so here's this girl coming in, same kind of thing, but on a higher level. She's trying to manipulate the situation. She's pressing all the buttons. She comes in by saying, men are always the problem. Men are nothing but trouble. Adults never listen to me. That kind of stuff. And the reason I specifically bring up this story is because it shows how blatantly that messaging is, that a girl who is only slightly off will come in and bandy that about as a trigger button to try and get her way. But how often do we see that happening in the subconsciouses of just humanity in general, from absorbing all the crap that's on the internet? How often do we sit there and go, and recoil at the sludge and filth that fills our algorithms as we watch YouTube and crap like that? And we come across these continual examples of people being absolutely ridiculous, saying the worst things about other people in blanket general statements. And I can just leave it at that, and you can fill that in, whether that's men versus women, or one race against another, or one religion against another. Just blanket statements. Oh, they're all terrible, or they're demons, or they're a cult, or they're this, or they're that. It's just like, come on, guys. Seriously? And so when you sit there and so when it came up in this book, talking about how women would plead for the life of their man or the situation, if you have imbibed so much bitterness and resentment towards the manipulation that just spews forth from the subconscious of people who just do not counter what they receive through the internet, that it's just that black sludge and toxicity that remains and festers in the recesses of the human mind, so that it can be pulled out as Schrodinger's feminism or Schrodinger's misogyny. Just, whenever it suits you, dismiss the other group of people whenever you want. Like I say, would their pleadings reach the hearts of men nowadays, or would it just not matter? Because we've learned by terrible and horrible consistency the ruthlessness by which such things can be bandied about. Why, oh why, do you think it is so important that such a little thing as the tongue, like a rudder on a ship, can steer so great a thing? The nature of Lehi's authority is clearly set forth in the Book of Mormon. Of the Arab sheik, we have noted Burkhart's remarks. His commands would be treated with contempt, but deference is paid to his advice. The real government of the Bedouins may be said to consist in the separate strength of their different families. The Arab can only be persuaded by his own relations. The sheikh's orders are never obeyed, but his example is generally followed. This is especially so on the march. While the tribe is in motion, the sheikh assumes all responsibility and the whole power of government. Yet in leading, he gives no orders. When his tent is struck, it is rahla, and the others without a word strike theirs. And when the place of encampment is reached, the sheikh puts his spear in the ground, and at once the tents are pitched. That's very interesting. That also would tie to those who would be leaders, let them be the servants. If your only real leadership, if your only real rule comes from example, you have to be an example in all things. I think that's, just reflect on that. If your leadership comes from telling people to do things and that no longer works, the only leadership that you have is by example, and people respect competency. In the sheikh's tent, the councils of the tribe are held, and all decisions concerning the journey are made. Just look at 1 Nephi 15:1. But no sheikh or council of Arabs can condemn a man to death, or even inflict a punishment. It can only, when appealed to, impose a fine. It cannot even enforce the payment of this fine. Why then, if there was no power to compel them, did not Laman and Lemuel simply desert the camp and go off on their own, as discontented Arabs sometimes do? As a matter of fact, they tried to do that in 1 Nephi 7:7, and in the end were prevented by two things which, according to Philby, keep any wandering Bedouin party together: fear and greed. For they were greedy, they hoped for a promised land, and when they reached the sea without finding it, their bitter complaint was, "Behold, these many years have we suffered in the wilderness, which time we might have enjoyed our possessions." 17:21. And their position was precarious. Nephi pointed them to the danger of returning to Jerusalem. 7:15. And where should they go if they deserted their father? As we've seen, these people, with these people, family was everything. And the Arab or Jew will stick to his own people because they are all he has in the world. The family is the basic social organization, civil and religious, with their father at its head. To be without tribe or family is to forfeit one's identity in the earth. Nothing is more terrible than to be cut off from among the people, and that is exactly the fate of the promised Laman and Lemuel if they rebelled. See 1 Nephi 2:21. With his own country, says an Arab proverb, the Bedouin is a lion. Outside of it, he is a dog. When the Lord has a task to be done, he picks a man who is most suited for the work by temperament and training. When Moses fled into Midian, he traveled afoot in the very deserts through which he was later to lead the children of Israel, and he lived and married among the people of the desert, in whose way of life he was to instruct his own people. Lehi was no less prepared and qualified for his great task, richly endowed with means and experience, wise in the ways of the desert, firm, resourceful, cautious, and unhurried, independent, and not to be intimidated. Nice. Never provoking, though sorely provoked, he exemplifies what Philby declared as in a moving passage, that only the greatest strength of character in a leader can carry a party safely through a dangerous desert. Quote, "For many days now I have endured the constant and inevitable friction of my own fixed and unalterable purpose, and the solid weight of that innate national inertia, thrown into the balance against me by the united body of my companions. Step by step, we had progressed ever away from their home fires, but each step had been achieved only by the smallest margin, as the momentum of a purposeful mind triumphed at each stage over the inert mass ever ready to recoil from any arduous objective." Unquote. Wow. Some other quotes from some of the footnotes here. "The tyranny of relations is more severe than the descent of the Indian sword," says the ancient poet Tarifa. I really like this major quote that I just read, because any good leader where you are trying to move things forward, get people to adopt new things, just even think about it in a regular corporate setting, sitting in your cubicles. They're like, hey, we're going to start this initiative, and we want you to make sure that you're like really engaging with those people, and here you need to do these things. Like, every worker is along the lines of, why are we doing this? What's the point? Do we really need to do this? Oh, fine, I guess we'll just try this. It's stuff like that. So every time you make one step forward, it is through sheer force of will. Those words might have been written to describe the achievement of Lehi. Had the Lord wished it, he could have transferred the whole party through the air. As it was, he apparently wanted them to do as much as possible on their own, with a minimum of miraculous intervention. Of all the righteous men in Jerusalem, Lehi alone was singled out for a task requiring a combination of qualifications and measure of faith which few men have ever had. But though Lehi was no ordinary man, one fact about him should begin to emerge at this point of our study: that he was an actual flesh and blood person in a real situation, and no synthetic and overdrawn character of romantic fiction moving among the phantasmagoric stage properties that were once thought to represent the gorgeous East. Dun, dun, dun. Yeah. Frankly, yeah. I'm going to check how far ahead till the end of the full chapter, because we're at a section break. Yeah, we'll leave that till next time. I'm fascinated by this. So yeah, again, what's the purpose of all this? It's helping two major things. First of all, I'm fairly certain that, well, I don't know. Sorry, I was about to say that anyone probably listening is along the lines, well, of course this was real. And that may be true for the most part, that people just listening to this book are going to be along the lines of, well, yeah, it's Lehi, it's Nephi, of course it's real, I've experienced this in my own family, how could this not be real, things like that. For other people, like I said, most of the time when I open a channel to getting more information by reading extracurricular spiritual books, a lot of times there's been things that have just been rattling around in my subconscious, and listening to these open sources, what it actually does is answer the questions that I never formulated, and gives me insight that I never thought to look for. And so similarly, I would hope that that's what's happening here, is that even though you may sit there and fully understand, oh yeah, Lehi, Nephi, all this, it's absolutely true, but yet at the same time, it's made more true, more deep and more understanding by the experiences related here. It's like when since I just finished the Lost Gems of Genesis before, sure, I knew the whole story of Adam and Eve. Did I know a lot of the details? Well, no, we didn't have the real Apocrypha and the scriptures. But more importantly, the sentiments of understanding why family and having a lot of children is so important. I remember growing up with that. The church subtly and continually encouraging, you should have families, grow families, have large families. It was a subtle subculture undercurrent in the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. And the emphasis of that seems to have dimmed as I grew up. But now with Jonah Barnes' books, I'm just like going, that's why? Of course! And it's like, that's what they taught when I was a kid, right? Yeah, but it fell out of favor because everyone was fighting against it. People thought it was like way too cultish, or it was way too this, or way too that, or whatever. I don't know. I don't know why it actually, fell out of curry for proclaiming the basic truth of the idea that, big families are good. Why? Well, because they not only help replenish the earth, but if you actually believe in the pre-existence and that everyone comes down here, you want to give everyone the best opportunity they can at having the fullness of the gospel and receiving its blessings. And it's a good idea to have many children, especially if you're willing to stay strong and righteous to help facilitate that. Sure, your children may not all stay that way. And yes, it's extremely difficult, especially as they get larger, because you'll have less overall full interaction with them one-on-one the larger your family gets. For example, there's, whatever, the Horton Hears the Who or whatever else, where the dad would had a conveyor belt for the children coming by. Sometimes you might feel like that, but in the end, if you can learn to lead by example and just really work with the ones who need it in the way that they need it, maybe that helps. But it really is just along the lines of, if you have good parents and you are willing to dedicate your life to being good parents, then why not try and help as many people come from the pre-existence and hold on to that and carry these promises of God through to the whole world through your own lineage. I mean, it was just shocking to me how close they came to disrupting the plan of salvation by stopping the advent of having children, of how recklessly selfish and demonically hedonistic they became. I think when you glimpse how horrific that is and what becomes of something like that, you suddenly appreciate the opposite a lot more. And so that basic kind of subculture undercurrent of, yeah, you want to have big families, yeah, you want to have more kids, it's suddenly no longer oh yeah, they just want you to turn you into a baby factory. It's like, no, we want to turn you into someone who has a righteous family, not a baby factory. Heck no! If all you are doing is just having more children because you think you should, no, that's not the point. The point is to try and help those children come to God and Jesus Christ. Please. That is the whole point. If you sit there and just flippantly disregard the welfare of those who you bring into this world, it is worse. It is terrible for you as a human being to try and bring that many children in when all you're doing is basically abandoning them to the wiles of the adversary. On the other hand, if you are trying to be righteous, then please be a wellspring of life and beauty and joy and the Spirit of God in the life by helping your children have the Spirit of God and have them grow up in righteousness. So yes to those parents who want to be righteous parents. And for those parents who want to just abandon their children out of selfishness and hedonism, no, don't have as many children, please. Because I want everyone to have as much righteousness as possible. And yet they twist it. They twist those kind of things. They twist all these things. That's why I was really reflecting, have the hearts of men waxed cold to the point that pleadings from others, would it have an effect on someone today? A modern person today who is about to do reckless acts, whether that's burglary, abuse, or worse, would the pleadings of women and children stop them? Would the pleadings of those who are vulnerable stop them? A lot to think about. But yes, hopefully this is enriching your understanding of the gospel, showing you the reality of the situation, and helping you reflect on what it really means. I know we often read the scriptures, and sometimes for people it's just words on a page. Or as not so recent now, but a fairly recent videos, there's some atheist who read the Book of Mormon, and he decided to quote Mark Twain saying that it was like chloroform in print. And I'm like, are you kidding me? Are you really kidding me? You sit there and think the Book of Mormon is chloroform in print? Are you blind? That's my initial reaction. And the reason why is because if you read the scriptures with purpose, you get all this history, information, and everything. My favorite books in the Book of Mormon is Omni and third or fourth Nephi. It's the super short ones. Why? There's a crap ton of information in an extremely small amount, and it just makes my imagination explode in trying to figure out what happened. What really went on when they sit there and say, well, this happened and then this happened. And it's such a brief description, and that's all you get. You kind of got to fill in the gaps. And you got to, and it just is amazing how well it does that. Or how I like to do that. So it's just, but for some atheist who's just reading it, who's not trying to get anything out of it, who's not trying to actually understand what's going on, it will just be words on a page in chloroform in print. And then when you read things like this, it hopefully brings it to life. Hopefully the next time you go through the Book of Mormon, you're like, oh, wait, I remember camping in the desert this one time, and oh, I see what he's talking about here. It fills in the details and the secondary skills that people lack, the ones beyond the just front fascia of face facades of what you need to learn about, right? The deeper understanding, the things that, learning from things that are unsaid, this fills in that blatantly for you. But if you read with real intent different things, if you actually try and get in to the psychology and subtext about the stuff that is not said, it is not written out for you, it's not shown to you blatantly, like most movies nowadays. Instead, you actually just gain understanding from the empty spaces in between. Like, that is what this is doing for you. It's filling that in. Because if you didn't know it, didn't notice it, didn't know how to notice it, this is filling it in for you. And then hopefully the next time you go through, you can see that more. And that way, when you get to the other sets of scriptures and other such things, you can see it even more. Develop that secondary skill. Because it's not just about, like I tell my children, it's not just about doing the dishes. Secondary skill of learning to enjoy and be willing to do the dishes on your own is the secondary skill that you should develop. Because can you just sit there and go scrubba, scrubba, scrubba? Sure. I can go read, sure. But the secondary skill of gathering the information beyond what is on the page is so much more important. Anyways, there's my musings, and I hope it is helping you as much as it helps me. And may God be with you.